Welcome again to Stepping Stones. It's good to have everybody here. We're in the Parables of Jesus message series. It's our last one in this series, and it's kind of an unusual one. Most of them have been, there's a farmer who represents God. He's planting and building the kingdom, and this one's a little bit odd. The Shrewd Manager. This is a parable that I think people have struggled to understand probably since Jesus taught it throughout the generations. It's hard because the star of the parable is this terrible cheating, embezzling
employee, and the man the boss who hired him is impressed with his deviousness and shrewdness as he steals from him. And you're like, what is Jesus trying to tell us through this? It almost looks like Jesus is impressed with the level of dishonesty and stealing and shrewdness. So I'm going to read this parable, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it. There's some really great things that Jesus said at the end of the parable. There's like a bunch of things that are lessons for us in life. So this is the parable of the shrewd manager from Luke 16, starting with verse 1. It says, Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. One day a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order, because you are going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig dishes, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" The man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. "And how much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. "Here," the manager said, "take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. The rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. If you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money." So there's a lot here. There's probably more teaching at the end of the parable than the actual story of the parable itself. But in the parable, the rich man has a manager who's handling his affairs. So I want to talk a little bit about this manager. So point number one, if you're following on the message, I want to talk about the manager. Absent owners were pretty common in that part of the world during that time. It's likely that this rich man in the parable was someone people they knew. He just owned a lot of land, and so he rented it out to the locals for farming, and they usually paid through some of the produce. That's why the bill was, hey, you owe some olive oil, or you owe some bushels of wheat, and because that was the rent they paid for using and farming the land that didn't belong to them. And probably the owner lived elsewhere, very common in those days. And so the owner gets a percentage of the crops as rent. But it seems from our story that our manager is either incompetent or he just doesn't care. We're not sure which about his owner, but word gets back that he's not handling things well. And he's wasting his owner's money. Now, we're not sure if it was fraud, embezzlement, and cheating at this point, but that's what it sure turned into. And so word got back to the owner, and he said, "That's it. You're not handling things well, you're dishonest, and you're fired." And so the manager's then out of a job. And the manager had kind of gotten used to white-collar work. He says, I don't want to have to dig ditches, man. I don't have to do manual labor. And I'm too proud. I don't want to go out and beg. So he got an idea. The manager realized that he still had control of some of the paperwork for what was going on. And so he gathered all these tenant farmers together that owed the man money, and he edited their bills. He adjusted them down so they owed less. He now had favor from them, but he was basically stealing from his boss. Now, him doing that did a couple of things. The first thing was the creditors are now more likely to befriend him. They almost owe him. He's helped them out, and they sort of really do owe him because he's sort of now made them accomplices in the fraud, right? So they're in on it. They changed and cheated, and so they sort of owe him, and they're sort of all in it together. And so what happens is this manager, he colludes with the creditors against his boss. And today you would have a hard time getting away with that because you'd be in jail for fraud. But the manager is trying to find a way to spin this terrible situation for his own benefit. Now, this is where, to me, the parable takes a funny turn that I didn't expect, because, once the owner figures it out, he's impressed. It's like, man, that was a really smart, shrewd plan you made to steal from me and set yourself up. So he sees that, hey, you've taken a situation that's bad and you've turned it, but it's for your own benefit. And so at this point, the parable sounds more like a really bad B movie than it does a parable of Jesus, because the manager is not really very good at his job. When he's confronted, he intentionally loses more of his boss's money to help himself, but he is shrewd, and he understands he can then use this position and his boss's money to set himself up for the future. So he was a terrible manager, but shrewd. In other words, he knew how to take things and spin it for his own benefit. And so people who've been reading this, probably the people who heard it when Jesus preached it, and scholars and people in academia and preachers have struggled with this parable probably ever since. I think it's mainly a struggle because all the characters seem to be sinful. It's not a parable about here's the hero, here's the good one. And yet the manager who outwitted and stole from his boss really well seems to be the hero. So it's a little disturbing. But the great news is regardless of the story, there's some really great lessons. And that's what I want to focus on today. Some of the lessons, in fact, most of them are spoken pretty much outright by Jesus. Others are a little more obvious. So I want to shift to point number 2, which is lessons from the shrewd manager. And I got 4 things out of this short parable that I think are really good for us to know. The first one, children of the world are wiser than children of the light. Okay, so that means people who aren't trying to follow God, live a righteous life, serve Him, dedicate their life to Him, they're more shrewd at handling things in the world. Like the manager, when things go bad, they're willing to go to just about any level to help themselves, whereas I'm like the poster child. If you look up this in the dictionary, there's my picture. I'm a terrible negotiator, bargainer. I'm like, oh, you want to pay that? Okay, that's good. Like I'm not shrewd like the manager was. I'm not good at getting great deals on things in life. But this children of the world are wiser than children of the light comes right from verse 8, when Jesus says, the rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And it is true that children of the world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of light. And so this is a comment on the behavior of the manager. I think that's what sparks it. But it's also a comment on just, most of us who want to do right, love people, love God, serve Him, aren't looking for an angle to help ourselves or to get over on somebody. But the manager in the story, he didn't have a hard time with that at all. His actions were dishonest and downright criminal. But it worked out in that he landed on his feet. I'm guessing he got a job. And it's a fictional story, but I'm sure similar things happened. But he was ready to benefit from being a bad manager. And so Jesus is telling us that when it comes to the matter of the world, maybe even most business things, believers aren't often as good as someone like the manager who's just looking to benefit themselves. And so some people have said of this idea that if we were as eager in our attempts to live well, to live righteous lives and serve God as someone in the world was to obtain money and wealth by shrewdness, we would all be a whole lot more faithful. Basically, Jesus is telling us that we should use our knowledge and wisdom and whatever resources we have for the accomplishment of good. And if the shrewd manager can be so creative to steal and turn the renters of his boss into his friends through bribes, then, we should be creative in making sure we use all of our resources for good. And that leads me to the next one. The second lesson is that we should use money to benefit others now, and of course that also means that it'll benefit me later in heaven. It's like the storing up the treasures in heaven and not on earth. This is one of the ones that says, this is the lesson. This is one stated. Jesus says in verse 9, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Now, it almost sounds like, take advantage of everything you have and makes it good for you. But I like that, he says they'll welcome you to an eternal home. So I think this is about storing up treasures in heaven. Use our resources to do all the good we can. And by doing so, we're basically, storing up treasures in heaven. I like the idea of taking things like my resources, my money, or my wealth, or whatever, my possessions, and almost converting it to something spiritual. By how I use it, I can then make it something that lasts in heaven. But this lesson does remind us, that how we use our money and our resources is really important. Just like the shrewd manager, we're constantly making decisions about money. We can't avoid it in this life. And, so the manager was using everyone else's money, and actually, technically, we are too. Every dollar, every possession, everything we own is temporary. When we die, it's going to be someone else's, not mine. And so we should be looking for ways to invest in things that are eternal. Shouldn't we see, wouldn't it be great if all of our things and our money we're doing things that could help in eternity, and the reality is all that we possess is just loaned to us from God. It's just ours for a few decades. Technically, we are the manager of it, and so and God has entrusted certain portions of His wealth to you, some to me, and to pretty much everyone has a little bit of it. We use it. We use a lot of it, most of it, to take care of ourselves and our family. That's a very needed thing. But especially for us in America, there's always more, right? We don't like to admit it, but we make more than we really need, which is why we have so many nice things and luxuries and so forth. But so I want us to consider how we can provide for ourselves and also provide for the benefit of others. I don't think God ever intended that we keep every bit of money we make and earn, but that we should be looking out for others. So that's a powerful lesson about use of money. The third lesson I want to share is, he says, small responsibilities show my character and predict how I handle the big ones. So small responsibilities show my character and predict how I handle the big ones. And Jesus spells this out in verse 10. He says, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large things. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with great responsibilities. And this, too, is a reference to the manager. He was not doing a good job. He was about to get fired. We aren't told, but it sounds like he was incompetent and a thief. But he was basically wasting his boss's money. And so this principle of being faithful over little, faithful over large, really is a spiritual principle. A lot of times I think we think, well, this isn't that important, so I'll handle it, I'll just, hold it loosely or out there. And then if I get something big and important, then I'll take care of it. But the problem is it's all about the development of our character. And so if we're like, this is a small thing, it's not that big important, but I'm going to handle it as well as I can, that helps me develop character. So then when I have bigger responsibility, I can do it well. Because bigger responsibilities also means bigger temptations and bigger problems. A lot of people in our day and age struggle with money. How much we make, we don't seem to have enough. How much do I have? And I feel like the statistics show basically prove out this principle of Jesus. I think that in America, most of us make enough money that we should be able to give generously and save for important expenses as well as live on what we have. But statistics show that I think it's over half of people, if you have $1,000 expense, something goes terribly wrong with your car, the engine drops out, or there's a plumbing problem and you've got to dig up something that costs $1,000, that's going to really almost wipe out. That's going to be a crisis for over half the people. It's going to be a big problem. Most people carry balances on their credit cards. That's the worst. That's the most expensive debt. The interest rates are outrageous, but it's an easy thing to do. The Bible teaches about tithing, giving 10%. The statistics show the average churchgoer gives somewhere a little above 1%. Used to be, I think, 2, now it's down to about 1. So what that tells me that we struggle to manage money well in our lives. And the common thinking is, I know what the problem is, I need more money, right? If I just had more money, then these problems would take care of themselves. But this principle of faithful over little or faithful over much and practical experience shows this isn't true. The truth is that when people struggle to manage money when they have a little, they're going to struggle a lot if they get more. The statistics, that's probably the saddest thing for me is the statistics on lottery winners. That's the big thing. That's the water cooler talk. What if I won the lottery? I don't know if you know this, but the vast majority of lottery winners, big ones, they end up in financial ruin within 5 years. And it's this principle. It's because they had a little bit of money and they struggled to manage it, and they didn't have the skills or the character, and then when they get a lot, it leads to big problems. So, so the lesson is that we should be responsible and faithful in everything we do. It doesn't matter how little it is, or if we think, oh, that's not important. Because what that does is that builds our character to say, I'm going to be responsible with all the things I'm given. And by the way, it's easier to change and grow when things are small than when they're big. And it's very hard to change our character later on. Once we get rich or have more responsibilities, then we'll do it. Well, that's a mistake. And then the final lesson today, and you've heard this probably before many times, we can't serve both God and money. And if you're like me, this causes a little bit of concern, because I live in the richest country in the world, and I have more than I need, and a lot of my life seems to be about earning money and then managing it once I have it. Most of us spend 40 plus hours a week getting our money, so a significant investment of ourselves goes into getting money. And so the question is, how do I earn money, save money, use money, and make sure I keep my allegiance to God and not my stuff, right? Because they say, you start to own a lot of stuff, pretty soon your stuff starts to own you. And the warning is that desiring wealth, desiring money, desiring more stuff pushes us closer to being enslaved by it. That's the danger. Here's what Jesus said in verse 13. He said, "No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and being enslaved to money." So love of money or wanting money works against us loving God and wanting his will in our lives. Now, first thing I'm going to say is it's not a sin to be rich. But if you read through the Bible and what it all says, what we're going to discover is that I think being rich is harder than being poor. Because the more you have, the more your money wants to own you. Even though, most of us would all prefer to be rich rather than poor. Spiritually and life speaking, poor is better. So the problem with money, though, comes not in having it so much as in loving it. When we're focused on making more, having more, that's when we got to be worried our money's starting to own us, maybe starting to enslave us. So the best way I know to combat this desire to have more and to combat being enslaved to money, letting our money own us, and I found is to be generous and give. Generosity serves a couple of purposes. First, when we give, we get to help others in need. Like I could have, with working with Grace Prep, I said, my goal is to earn as much money from all the renters. We've probably had half a dozen to 10 renters in the 20+ years I've been here. And my goal has never been, I want to get as much money out of them as I can. My goal has been, I want to be fair, and I want us to both feel like we're getting a good deal and that it's blessing ministry, right? So, so the first benefit of giving is we help others, because giving others provides for it. The other thing is it helps us too. If the danger with money is in loving it, trying to accumulate a lot of it, spending my life trying to earn more, get more, giving some of it away helps solve the problem. If I can give to others, I'm not so far gone that I'm enslaved to money that I can't part with a single dollar of it, right? I'm giving it. And so that kind of combats this idea that it's not just about me accumulating as much as I can get. And so if you're struggling with materialism, if you're struggling feeling like money's starting to have the better of me, the best cure I know of, give some of it away. Give it to someone to do some good. So unusual parable, some very interesting life lessons, about being faithful in little and about the danger of money. And so I want to focus now and shift over to next steps. They're on the back of your message notes, back of your Connect cards. And so I want to challenge you. How do we respond to this teaching of Jesus, which is pretty deep? Now, first it says, commit to be faithful in the responsibilities I have, no matter how small. Maybe for you, I think we all have this temptation. It's just a small thing. It's not that important. Well, Jesus taught us that if we're really responsible with the little responsibilities, we're building our character and preparing ourselves for something better. And so maybe that's your next step. Maybe you're like, yeah, I've been not taking seriously the small things, and I want to do that. The second is about committing to find ways to invest my money in helping others. Maybe this is God's calling you today to say, hey, you're getting a little too close to the money, you're loving it too much, give some away. And again, I'm not saying, this isn't a plea to get more money for stepping stones. Give your money to something else, someone else. Maybe you have a friend who you're like, if I could just help them out, loan them this thing or give them this item or whatever. But it's a great way to do that. The third one, commit to, so here's a real next action step right away. Commit to give this week, right? It's a way to combat materialism. If you're just feeling like, man, I've just been all about money and acquiring, I want this latest luxury item, maybe you're like, I just need to give something away this week. And then rereading this parable is worth a read. There's a lot of great lessons at the end. So those are the next steps. I hope that the Lord has been speaking to you about how he wants us to walk closer with him and live life better. So I want to pray for you as you consider and take these next steps. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, this is a complicated and confusing parable of Jesus. We're not sure who the heroes and villains are. They seem like they're all villains, but we know there's some great lessons. Help us, Lord, to see what it is you're wanting us to see and to know. Show us something in our lives that where you're working, where you want us to take a next step. And we just pray, Lord, help us to not be so about money, and that we're losing our faith with you. So we just pray, help us in our lives. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.